So, welcome to another YouTube video. I'm here in sunny Antalya, sitting down for dinner. So let's get into it. Hope you enjoy. So, I'm in Antalya on the south coast of Turkey by the Mediterranean, and this trip already feels different to most of the ones I've done in recent years. It's probably the first proper holiday I've had since I was much younger, not because I've had more time, but because I've arrived without the familiar pressure in my head. The pressure to see everything, to make the most of it, to somehow justify being here by turning the trip into a kind of achievement, something to tick off the bucket list. This time, I didn't really want to do that. I wasn't looking for highlights or a list of things to get through. I just wanted a place where I could slow down, do a bit of a walk, enjoy the weather, and let the days be fairly simple. And Antalya suits that almost immediately. The weather helps, obviously. It's a bit grey and not so warm, cloudy at the moment, but the forecast looks good later on. Nonetheless, it's still quite warm now. I've been here before, by the way, which changes the way you experience a place. There's no urge to figure it out or form a final plan. I'm not here to work out what Antalya is. I'm just letting it sit in the background while I get on with my day, really. The routine is deliberately unambitious. I plan to do a bit of work, to walk around, to eat, drink maybe a bit, swim, and sit around doing quite little. Time to let my brain rest a bit. And then just repeat the same again tomorrow and again the day after. I've started out here in the old part of town. It's late morning, easing into things, you could say. The weather isn't weathering quite yet, but the clouds should clear soon and it should start to brighten up. Fingers crossed. Some people at least, are sitting outside. Shops are starting to open up. Nothing feeling urgent, which is reassuring because for once I'm not trying to manage the holiday. I'm just here to live inside it for a bit, and that in itself already feels like a small luxury. Walking around the old town, it becomes pretty clear why this place works so well if you're trying not to overdo a holiday. It's not Istanbul, for one. On paper, it's still very touristy. There are shops everywhere selling the same kinds of things: clothes, ceramics, rugs, souvenirs, all the usual stuff you get in Turkey. But what's interesting is how little attention they demand from you. Maybe it's because I was in Istanbul just before this. But anyway, no one's rushing you. No one's pulling you inside. You can look, keep walking, turn back, or completely ignore it all, and nothing really changes. That alone takes a surprising amount of pressure off. I think a lot of holiday stress comes from feeling like you're constantly meant to be engaging with a place, seeing things, doing things, reacting to things, buying things. Here, it doesn't feel like the city expects anything from you. Between the shops, people are just sitting around. Outside cafes in the shade on chairs that look like they've been dragged out years ago and never moved back in. Some are chatting, some are staring into space, some are clearly doing absolutely nothing at all. Others are walking somewhere relatively important, I suppose. But the same constant is that no one seems in a hurry, no one seems in a rush. It's late morning, so the day probably hasn't decided what it's going to be yet. Things are open, people are moving around, but gently. Scooters pass through, small groups wander by. Someone stops, checks their phone, carries on. What I notice is that nothing feels like a must. You don't get that sense that if you don't stop right now, you've somehow failed the visit. You can always go back. In essence, you can drift through the old town without turning it into a task. And that fits this trip perfectly, for me at least. I'm not trying to do Antalya. I'm just using the city as a backdrop while I slow my own pace down, walking because it's warm, turning down streets because they're there, letting the place exist without constantly responding to it. It's a small place, but it changes the whole feel of the day. Instead of chasing the city, you let it sit around. And once that happens, the holiday stops feeling like something you have to manage and starts feeling like time you're actually allowed to waste. As I keep walking, the city starts to slope downhill, which is usually a sign that something's about to change. Cities don't always announce it, but once you're heading toward the sea, they tend to reorganize themselves a bit. The old town starts to open up, less stone, more sky. The air feels different, not in a mystical way, just looser. You notice people spacing themselves out a bit more, stopping for no obvious reason, leaning on things they didn't need to lean on a minute ago. I think coastal cities do this thing where they quietly lower expectations. You don't suddenly feel relaxed, you just stop concentrating so hard. Up in the tighter streets, you're alert, watching your step, dodging scooters, looking where you're going, checking shops for something to buy. Down here, that effort drops away. There's a moment where the sea comes into view and it's not a big reveal, but it's wonderful. It doesn't demand a reaction. It's more like, right, that's pretty nice. People behave differently once water's involved. Walking slows down, pauses get longer. Standing still suddenly looks like a perfectly reasonable use of time. And I notice I start doing the same. Looking out for a bit longer than necessary, stopping halfway down the street for no real reason, doing that classic holiday thing where you check the time then immediately decide it doesn't matter. Nothing's really happened yet. I haven't arrived anywhere important, I guess. But the day already feels more spacious than it did half an hour ago. That's the quiet advantage of being near the sea. It doesn't entertain you necessarily. It just rearranges the pace of things, including you, without making a fuss about it. And from here on, the walk stops feeling like movement and starts feeling like time. The harbour itself feels like a natural pause in the city, not somewhere you rush to, more somewhere you end up once you've stopped heading anywhere in particular. It's a bit of a crossroads. Tour boats heading out, people arriving back, others just milling around deciding what to do next. Some clearly on day trips, some clearly not in any hurry to move on. There's a lot of low-level activity going on. People checking tickets, taking photos that may or may not ever be looked at again.
Hello.
Negotiating where to sit, what to eat, whether they're actually hungry or just bored. I find myself hovering rather than committing to anything, walking a bit, stopping, changing direction, then stopping again. The kind of movement that doesn't really count, as exercise or progress just feels right anyway. There's music coming up from the steps. I think you saw the guy playing some old-fashioned instrument. It, I suppose, in a strange way, it fits, it blends in. Anyway, no one gathers properly. It's in the middle of the steps. Everyone just probably absorbs it briefly and carries on. I suppose some give some money. But what I like about the harbour is that it feels useful without being demanding. You can pass through it, linger in, or completely ignore it, and it works either way. I don't know if I would call it a highlight. It's obviously beautiful, but I don't know if it's on the bucket list for people that come here. It's more like a buffer zone between parts of the day, and that suits this trip perfectly. Nothing to tick off, nothing to react to properly. Just a nice, calm, beautiful place by the sea. A place that lets the afternoon stretch out before deciding what happens next. By the time evening rolls in, the place hasn't really changed. It's just turned the volume up a lot. The lights come on, the streets get busier, and suddenly everything's a bit more social. A buzz is in the air. Restaurants fill up, music drifts out from doorways. People sit closer together and stay out a bit later than they probably planned to. It feels lively, but not so chaotic, I suppose. No one's rushing from one place to the next. It's more like the day's being stretched into the evening rather than replaced by it. I wander past bars and restaurants, catch bits of live music, the odd conversation floating past. Some places are clearly aiming for a big night out. Others look perfectly happy, just feeding people and letting them get on with it. That's the thing I keep noticing here. Even at night, nothing feels like a performance. You can stop for a drink, sit down for food, listen to music for a bit, or just keep walking. There's no sense that you're missing the real version of the evening if you don't commit to it fully. You don't have to stay late. You don't have to make a night of it. You're allowed to dip in and out. I end up eating something simple, sitting around longer than planned, much longer than planned, smoking a bit, listening without really paying attention, which at this point feels about right. The night does its thing. I don't need to do much in return. And the only real commotion was when a group of tourists from India were finishing their night, getting ready to leave. One of the guys closest to my table pushed his chair back into my shisha that had been smoking and knocked it over. I wasn't so bothered. I was getting ready to leave as well. But obviously the staff in the restaurant prepared me a brand new shisha. So 1 minute I'm getting ready to leave. The next I feel obliged to stay 30 minutes more. But I suppose it wasn't such a problem. I was kind of on holiday. And the next day feels noticeably quieter. Not because the city's changed, but because everything's familiar now. I've walked around much, much more. I've gone down every street 3 times. And this one might be my favourite. Walking along by the sea, it's clear how easy it is to fall into a rhythm here. You don't really need to plan the day. You just sort of slot yourself into it. There's space to walk, space to sit, space to do very little without feeling like you're wasting time. People are out early, moving slowly, grabbing coffee, staring at the water like it's part of the morning routine rather than a special event. This is the point where the holiday stops feeling like time off and starts feeling like a temporary version of normal life. I do a bit of work in the mornings, then I go for a bit of a walk. I go to the beach, I eat something simple, and I swim for a bit, and then I sunbathe. I do some crosswords and Sudoku. None of it feels like an activity. It's just how the day unfolds. I think that's why this place works so well for this kind of trip. It doesn't push novelty into you. It doesn't expect you to be impressed every 5 minutes. It just gives you a layout that makes everyday things easy to repeat. Once that happens, the days stop blurring together in a bad way and start lining up in a good one. Not exciting, not crazy memorable in a dramatic sense, just comfortable, and at this point, that's exactly what I want. And the beach, it's a private one. I had the choice between this one, which was 5 minutes walk from my place, but cost £5 for the day, or one that was like a 30-minute taxi ride away. I chose this one. So every day I head down, find a spot, drop my things, and that's basically it. No grand setup, no sense that this needs to be a beach day. I even found out that I could pay enjoy, go home and come back, and not have to pay for 2 entries. Maybe the thing that I most enjoyed about this trip was swimming. I'd lost complete interest in going to the sea and swimming, an activity that I used to do every summer when I was a kid. And I got back into it here. I wasn't going far, I wasn't going fast, just enough to cool off and remind myself where I am. Then I sit around while everything dries on its own, which always feels like a small luxury. Breakfast turns up without much ceremony. Something simple, a coffee, and ayran, which is a cold dairy drink. I sit there longer than necessary doing absolutely nothing really productive, and it doesn't feel like time I need to justify. What I like is how normal all of this feels. People come and go, some stay longer, some barely stop. There's the sound of the sea, the odd interruption, even some helicopters passing overhead, someone talking nearby, and it all just blends into the background. This is the point where the routine almost disappears. Swim, sit, eat, stare, repeat. The day stops having clear edges. And that's usually when I realize I'm properly relaxed. Not because I'm doing something special, but because I'm happy staying exactly where I am, with nothing particular to get back to. By the end of the trip, the days have all started to look fairly similar. And I mean that in a good way. Walks, the sea, food, sitting around, the odd bit of work. Nothing especially memorable on its own, but somehow that's exactly what I'll remember. There's no feeling that I've missed anything, no sense that I should have done more or seen more or squeezed more out of it. It's just been easy. And after a long stretch of trips that felt like projects, that's turned out to be surprisingly valuable. So I'll leave it there. No conclusion really, just the end of a few quiet days by the sea in a place that made it very easy to not try too hard. So I've just had a lovely swim and the sun is setting right now on Antalya and our video. Like, subscribe, see you guys.